Have you ever noticed that the moment you finally become stronger, the moment you stop apologizing for who you are, the moment you start setting boundaries, the moment you stop seeking approval, something strange begins to happen? The people who once seemed comfortable around you suddenly start behaving differently. They're colder, more critical, more distant, more unpredictable. And nowhere is this pattern more visible than in relationships with narcissists. Because narcissists love power, not healthy influence, not mutual respect. Power. The ability to shape your emotions, control your decisions, manipulate your perception, and most importantly, determine how you see yourself. But what happens when that power starts slipping away? What happens when the person they once controlled becomes stronger, more confident, more self-aware, more independent? What happens when their usual tactics stop working? That's when many narcissists reveal one of their dirtiest tricks, a psychological strategy so subtle that most people don't recognize it until significant damage has already been done. A strategy designed for one purpose: to make strong people doubt themselves. Because here's something most people don't understand about narcissists. They are often far less concerned with controlling weak people than they are with controlling strong people. Weak people are predictable, easy to manipulate, easy to influence, but strong people represent a challenge, a threat, a reminder that control is never guaranteed. And narcissists hate uncertainty. They hate losing influence. They hate watching someone become emotionally independent, because emotional independence is the beginning of freedom, and freedom is something narcissists often struggle to tolerate in others, especially when that freedom removes their ability to control. This is why many people experience a strange shift during personal growth. As they become healthier, certain relationships become more difficult. As they gain confidence, certain people become more critical. As they develop boundaries, certain people become more aggressive. At first, it doesn't make sense. Shouldn't healthy growth improve relationships? Shouldn't confidence create respect? Shouldn't self-awareness strengthen connections? In healthy relationships, yes. But narcissistic dynamics operate differently, because the narcissist often benefited from the old version of you, the uncertain version, the people-pleasing version, the self-doubting version, the version that constantly sought approval, the version that tolerated behavior they should never have accepted. That version was easier to control, and when it disappears, the narcissist notices immediately. This is where the dirty trick begins. Not with obvious attacks, not with direct confrontation, not at first. The smartest narcissists understand that open hostility can expose their intentions, so they choose something far more effective, something much more difficult to identify. They begin attacking your perception of reality. Slowly, carefully, strategically. Not enough to alarm you, just enough to confuse you. A subtle comment here, a small criticism there, a dismissive reaction, a questioning look, a sarcastic remark disguised as humor. Tiny moments, moments so small that they seem insignificant on their own. But together they create a pattern, and that pattern has one objective: to make you question yourself. Because self-doubt is the doorway through which control returns. Think about that. A confident person is difficult to manipulate. A self-aware person is difficult to manipulate. A person who trusts their instincts is difficult to manipulate. But a person who doubts themselves? That's different. The moment doubt enters the picture, everything becomes easier. The narcissist no longer needs to control you directly. They simply need to nurture your uncertainty, and uncertainty does the rest. You start second-guessing decisions, questioning instincts, analyzing every interaction, wondering whether you're being unreasonable, wondering whether you're overreacting, wondering whether you're the problem. And once that cycle begins, the narcissist gains exactly what they wanted. Access. Access to your confidence. Access to your emotional stability. Access to your perception. One of the most common ways this trick appears is through what psychologists sometimes describe as reality distortion. The narcissist doesn't necessarily deny obvious facts. Instead, they reinterpret them. You express a concern. They call you sensitive. You establish a boundary. They call you selfish. You notice a pattern. They accuse you of imagining things. You confront disrespect. They claim you're creating drama. Notice what's happening. The focus shifts away from the behavior and toward your reaction. Suddenly, you're defending your perception rather than examining their actions. And this shift is incredibly important because once the conversation becomes about your reaction, the original issue disappears. The narcissist no longer needs to explain their behavior. Instead, you're busy explaining your feelings, defending your observations, justifying your boundaries. And while you're doing that, the real problem remains untouched. This creates a mental trap, a trap many strong people fall into precisely because they care about fairness, because they care about truth, because they genuinely want to understand situations accurately. The narcissist exploits these qualities, not because they're weaknesses, because they're strengths. Strengths that can be redirected. A thoughtful person naturally considers different perspectives. A narcissist uses that openness against them. A compassionate person naturally examines their own behavior. A narcissist uses that self-reflection against them. An emotionally intelligent person wants healthy communication. A narcissist uses that desire against them. Slowly, the strong person begins investing enormous amounts of energy trying to understand the situation, trying to resolve confusion, trying to restore harmony. Meanwhile, the narcissist remains focused on something else entirely: maintaining control. What's particularly dangerous is that this tactic often intensifies when the narcissist senses they're losing influence. The stronger you become, the more subtle the manipulation becomes. Because direct control is no longer possible. You won't tolerate obvious disrespect. You won't tolerate obvious manipulation. You won't tolerate obvious abuse. So the narcissist adapts. They become indirect, strategic, psychological. And this is where many people become trapped, because they expect manipulation to look dramatic, obvious, easy to identify. But the most effective manipulation rarely looks like manipulation. It looks like confusion, misunderstandings, mixed signals, emotional uncertainty. And the longer it continues, the harder it becomes to see clearly, especially when the narcissist occasionally alternates between criticism and kindness. This is another part of the trick. One moment they're dismissive. The next moment they're supportive. One moment they're cold. The next moment they're charming. One moment they undermine you. The next moment they praise you. These emotional fluctuations create instability. And instability creates dependence, because human beings naturally seek certainty. When certainty disappears, people often work harder to regain it. The narcissist understands this and uses it. But here's the part most people don't realize. The dirty trick isn't actually designed to destroy you. It's designed to make you destroy your own confidence, because confidence destroyed from within is far more effective than confidence attacked from the outside. If someone openly insults you, you may reject it. If someone openly attacks you, you may resist. But if you begin questioning yourself, now the attack is happening internally, and that's where narcissists often want it. Because internal battles consume enormous amounts of energy that could otherwise be used for growth, healing, success, freedom. Which brings us to the most important question of all. What happens when the strong person finally recognizes the trick? What happens when they stop defending themselves against manufactured doubt? What happens when they stop explaining, justifying, and proving? Because there comes a moment in every narcissistic dynamic when the strongest people see something they were never supposed to see: the pattern. And once that pattern becomes visible, the entire game begins changing. Because the narcissist's dirtiest trick only works while it's hidden. The moment it's exposed, something remarkable starts happening. Something the narcissist fears more than confrontation, more than criticism, more than rejection. And once you understand what that is, you'll never look at these dynamics the same way again. And that's exactly where the story continues. Because the moment a strong person finally sees the pattern, everything begins to change. Not overnight, not instantly, but gradually, like someone waking from a long dream. At first, the realization feels uncomfortable because recognizing manipulation often means confronting painful truths. Truths about people you trusted, people you cared about, people whose opinions once mattered deeply. And perhaps the most difficult truth of all is this: the confusion was never accidental. The mixed signals were not random. The self-doubt was not a coincidence. The instability served a purpose. Once this becomes clear, the strong person starts asking different questions. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" they begin asking, "Why do I always feel confused after talking to this person?" Instead of asking, "Am I overreacting?" they begin asking, "Why are my concerns constantly being dismissed?" Instead of asking, "How can I explain myself better?" they begin asking, "Why am I always the one explaining myself?" These questions are powerful because they shift attention away from self-blame and toward observation. And observation is dangerous to narcissists, very dangerous. Because manipulation thrives in confusion. It thrives when people are emotionally overwhelmed. It thrives when people are constantly defending themselves. But the moment someone becomes an observer, the dynamic changes. The strong person begins noticing patterns, not isolated incidents, patterns. And patterns tell stories that individual moments often hide. They notice how boundaries are treated, how success is received, how confidence is challenged, how independence is discouraged, how self-respect is interpreted as rebellion. Suddenly the pieces start fitting together. What once felt random now feels predictable, and predictability destroys the illusion. One of the biggest fears a narcissist has is not being challenged. It's being understood. Think about that carefully. Most people assume narcissists fear confrontation, but confrontation often gives them attention, drama, engagement, emotional energy. Understanding is different. Understanding sees through the performance, sees through the manipulation, sees through the strategy. And once someone truly understands the game becomes much harder to play. This is why many narcissists become increasingly frustrated when strong people stop reacting. Not because they've won, but because they've lost access. For years, they may have been able to trigger guilt, fear, self-doubt, anxiety, confusion. Now those buttons stop working. The strong person notices the attempt, recognizes the tactic, and refuses to participate. This can be incredibly unsettling for a narcissist, because control requires cooperation, not conscious cooperation, emotional cooperation. The target must engage, defend, explain, argue, react. Without that participation, the manipulation loses momentum. Imagine a magician performing tricks for an audience. The illusion works because people focus on what the magician wants them to see. But once someone understands the trick, the magic disappears. The performance remains. The effect does not. That's exactly what happens when strong people see through narcissistic manipulation. The behavior may continue. The tactics may continue. The attempts may continue. But the effect weakens dramatically. Another reason this realization is so powerful is because it restores trust. Not trust in the narcissist, trust in yourself. And this is where many survivors experience their greatest transformation. Because narcissistic dynamics often damage self-trust. Over time, people learn to question their instincts, question their perceptions, question their feelings, question their memories, question their boundaries. Everything becomes uncertain. The narcissist becomes the authority, the interpreter of reality, the judge of what is reasonable, the judge of what is true. But healing reverses this process. Slowly, the strong person begins trusting themselves again. They trust what they observe, trust what they feel, trust what they notice, trust their intuition. This doesn't mean becoming reckless. It doesn't mean assuming you're always right. It means valuing your perspective instead of automatically dismissing it. And that shift is life-changing, because self-trust is one of the strongest defenses against manipulation. A person who trusts themselves is difficult to confuse, difficult to control, difficult to destabilize. Not impossible, but much more difficult. There's another reason narcissists use this dirty trick when they perceive someone as strong. Strength threatens the story they tell themselves. Many narcissists depend on feeling superior, more intelligent, more important, more insightful, more powerful. The presence of a genuinely strong person challenges that narrative, especially if that strength comes without arrogance, without hostility, without competition. A calm, confident person often creates more insecurity than an aggressive one. Why? Because calm confidence cannot easily be dismissed. It doesn't seek validation. It doesn't seek approval. It simply exists, and that can be deeply unsettling to someone whose self-worth depends on comparison. This is why strong people are frequently targeted in unexpected ways, not because they're weak, because they're difficult to dominate. And when domination becomes impossible, destabilization becomes the next strategy. The narcissist hopes that enough confusion will create enough doubt to weaken the person's confidence. Sometimes it works, for a while. But eventually something interesting happens. The strong person starts noticing a pattern that changes everything. They realize their confidence only decreases around certain individuals. Think about that. In other environments, they're capable, respected, competent, grounded. Yet around one particular person, they suddenly feel confused, uncertain, inadequate, questioning themselves. That contrast becomes revealing. Because healthy relationships generally increase clarity. They increase confidence. They increase growth. Even during disagreements, unhealthy dynamics often create the opposite: confusion, instability, self-doubt. And once this contrast becomes visible, it's difficult to ignore. The strong person begins reclaiming something they lost: perspective. The ability to step outside the emotional storm and evaluate what's actually happening. And perspective changes everything, because manipulation feels powerful when you're inside it. From a distance, it often becomes surprisingly obvious. This is one reason healing frequently accelerates after emotional distance is created. Distance creates clarity. Clarity reveals patterns. Patterns reveal truth. And truth restores freedom. Perhaps the greatest irony of all is that the narcissist's dirtiest trick often produces the exact opposite of its intended result. Instead of permanently weakening the strong person, it eventually teaches them something invaluable: discernment, the ability to recognize manipulation, the ability to identify unhealthy dynamics, the ability to trust themselves, the ability to protect their peace. These lessons are hard-earned, painfully earned, but once learned, they become permanent. The strong person emerges wiser, more aware, more resilient, more selective, more grounded, not because of the narcissist, because of what they learned while overcoming the narcissist. And that's where the real power shift occurs. Not when the narcissist changes, not when they apologize, not when they finally understand. The real power shift happens when the strong person no longer needs any of those things. No apology, no validation, no acknowledgement, no closure from the person who created the confusion. Because they have already found something far more valuable: clarity. And clarity is powerful. Powerful enough to end cycles. Powerful enough to restore confidence. Powerful enough to break emotional dependence. Powerful enough to expose manipulation. Most importantly, powerful enough to remind you who you were before someone taught you to doubt yourself. In the end, the ultimate dirty trick a narcissist uses against strong people is not criticism, not anger, not rejection. It's self-doubt, the hope that you'll become your own enemy, the hope that you'll question yourself so thoroughly that they no longer need to control you. You'll do it for them. But the moment you recognize that trick, everything changes. because self-doubt loses its power when it's seen clearly. And once clarity returns, confidence begins returning too. Not the loud confidence that seeks attention, the quiet confidence that comes from self-trust. The confidence that no longer needs permission, no longer needs approval, no longer needs validation. The confidence that knows who it is. And that confidence is precisely what the narcissist feared from the very beginning. Because a person who trusts themselves is far beyond the reach of manipulation. And once you reach that point, the game isn't won. The game is over.